The banking system locked everyone out 14 hours ago. ATMs are dark. Credit cards are useless plastic. Your phone still has signal, but every website times out after 3 seconds, and the last news update you saw said, "Developing situation," before cutting to static. 3 houses on your street are already boarded up. The owners left in the middle of the night with whatever fit in their cars. A guy you've never seen before is walking down the middle of the road with a shopping cart full of bottled water and a 1,000-yard stare. The grocery store closed 6 hours ago after someone drove a truck through the front window. You have 72 hours before the food distribution system completely fails and the real sorting begins. No worries. We're going to figure out exactly which survival archetype you are using: sociology, evolutionary psychology, and the kind of brutal honesty that will make you question every life choice you've made. Thing is, when society collapses, people don't die randomly. They die in patterns. Sociologists who study disasters, anthropologists who study collapsed civilizations, and military strategists who plan for worst-case scenarios all agree. There are 5 distinct groups that emerge in every major collapse. 3 of them die in the first month. 2 of them make it past the first year. The difference between these groups isn't luck, isn't preparation, isn't even intelligence. It's psychology, skill sets, and social positioning. You're already in one of these groups, whether you know it or not. Your survival depends on figuring out which one, accepting it, and either playing to your strengths or fixing your weaknesses before the window closes. My job is to show you the mirror. Your job is to look at it without lying to yourself, because self-deception is the fastest way to become a statistic with a really good excuse. Group 1. The unprepared optimists. Everyone knows someone like this. They're convinced it won't get that bad. The government will handle it. Things will go back to normal. Someone will fix this. They have 0 supplies, 0 skills, and 0 contingency plans because they've spent their entire lives in a system that rewarded outsourcing problems to institutions. Reality arrives like a brick through a window. When the collapse hits, they panic. They rush to stores that are already empty or dangerous. They trust official evacuation orders that lead them into gridlock or worse. They give away resources to strangers because they still think social contracts matter. They wait for help that isn't coming. They make themselves visible, vulnerable, and dependent at exactly the moment when all 3 are fatal. The psychological profile is normalcy bias, the brain's tendency to underestimate the probability and impact of disasters because they've never experienced one. Their entire threat assessment system is calibrated for a world where 911 works and insurance exists. They can't make the cognitive leap from "things are bad" to "things will never be the same" fast enough to adapt. By the time they accept reality, they've already made 3 or 4 critical mistakes that compound into a death sentence. What kills them isn't stupidity, it's lag time. They're running version 1.0 software in a version 2.0 reality. They trust the wrong people. They go to the wrong places. They wait when they should move and move when they should hide. Within 7 days, they're either casualties of violence, exposure, dehydration, or just bad decisions made in good faith. The brutal truth: if you have no supplies, no plan, and no skills, and you're reading this thinking, "But I'm a good person," you're in this group. Goodness is not a survival skill. It's a social luxury that evaporates the moment consequences become immediate. You have maybe 48 hours to move yourself into a different category by acquiring basic supplies, forming alliances, and accepting that the rules changed. Outcome: 40% of the population. Dead within 7 to 14 days. Mostly from dehydration, exposure, violence during resource scrambles, and medical emergencies that would be treatable in normal times. They're not dumb. They're just calibrated for a world that doesn't exist anymore. Group 2. The Panicked Hoarders. These people saw it coming, or thought they did. They've got a garage full of canned food, bottled water, ammunition, and a bug-out bag they've never actually used. They watched YouTube videos. They bought gear. They thought they were prepared. What actually happens, they have supplies, but zero operational security and zero community. They hoard it alone, which means everyone knows they have stuff. Their garage full of supplies becomes a target within days. They're not trained in violence, but they've convinced themselves they'll defend their stockpile. They won't. When 3 desperate people show up at 2 a.m., they either hand it over or they get hurt trying to stop them. Or they successfully defend it once, kill someone, and now they're a marked target for retaliation. Their fortress is a prison, and prisons fall. The psychological failure is main character syndrome. They've watched enough movies to believe they're the hero who survives alone through tactical brilliance and superior firepower. Reality is uglier. Violence is a specialty skill that requires training, desensitization, and most critically, numerical superiority. One person with a gun versus 3 people with improvised weapons loses unless they're extremely lucky or extremely trained. They're neither. Even if they avoid violence, they burn through supplies faster than planned because they didn't account for stress, physical labor, or other people showing up asking for help. They can't say no. Social conditioning is still too strong. They give away 30% of their stockpile in acts of charity that don't buy loyalty, just temporary gratitude. Within 3 weeks, they're running low, isolated, paranoid, and either getting raided or dying of something preventable because they have no medical knowledge and no allies. The fatal flaw is isolation. Humans are tribal animals. Solo survival is statistically suicidal. The guy with a bunker full of MREs and 0 friends dies alone, while the guy with half the supplies and 3 trusted neighbors makes it to month 6. Outcome: 25% of the population. Dead or absorbed into other groups by week 3. Most common causes: violence during raids, medical emergencies, psychological breakdown leading to poor decisions. Their supplies get redistributed to smarter survivors who understood that resources without community are just bait. Group 3. The skilled tradespeople. Electricians, plumbers, carpenters, mechanics, nurses, farmers, welders. People who work with their hands and understand physical systems. They might not have huge stockpiles, but they have something more valuable: skills people need. When the grid goes down, the plumber who can rig a water filtration system becomes essential. The mechanic who can keep a generator running becomes irreplaceable. The nurse who can treat infections without antibiotics becomes the difference between life and death. These people have leverage. They can trade skills for resources, for protection, for inclusion in groups that would otherwise exclude them. The advantage is immediate utility. While hoarders are defending stockpiles and optimists are panicking, tradespeople are being recruited. Communities form around people who can solve problems. A good mechanic can join a group that has food but no fuel access. A carpenter can trade shelter building for security. A nurse can trade medical knowledge for everything else. They're not rich in resources. They're rich in irreplaceable human capital. The science is specialization and comparative advantage. In a collapsed economy, barter replaces currency, and skills become the new wealth. But not all skills transfer. Accountants, marketers, lawyers, their expertise is worthless when institutions are gone. Tradespeople's expertise increases in value because scarcity makes physical problems more urgent and professional solutions unavailable. The risk is exploitation. Skilled people get worked to exhaustion because they're too valuable to lose, but not powerful enough to say no. Communities can turn predatory, treating skilled members like assets instead of people. Medical professionals especially get burned out or hurt because they're constantly exposed to infection, injury, and impossible decisions about who gets treatment. Outcome: 15% of the population. Survival rate around 60% because they're valuable enough to protect but vulnerable to exploitation, exhaustion, and the same resource scarcity everyone faces. They make it past month 1 reliably, but long-term survival depends on finding a group that values them without consuming them. Group 4. The socially connected. These aren't preppers. They're not particularly skilled. What they have is relationships. They know their neighbors. They're embedded in communities, church groups, sports leagues, volunteer organizations, family networks. When collapse hits, they immediately have a web of people to coordinate with. Strength in numbers isn't just a cliché. It's evolutionary game theory. A group of 5 can defend what one person cannot. A network of 20 can pool resources, divide labor, share intelligence, and provide redundancy. When one person gets sick, the group continues functioning. When one family runs out of food, others supplement. The connected person doesn't need to be the strongest or the smartest. They just need to be integrated into a functional tribe. The psychological advantage is trust infrastructure. These people aren't building relationships during the collapse. They're activating relationships built over years. They know who's reliable, who has what skills, who can be trusted in a crisis. They're not negotiating terms with strangers under stress. They're calling in social capital accumulated during normal times. Evolution hardwired humans for reciprocal altruism. You help people who've helped you. You trust people who've proven trustworthy. The socially connected person has a history of small favors, shared meals, friendly conversations, low-cost investments that pay dividends when cooperation becomes survival critical. They're not loners trying to join groups as outsiders. They're insiders who help organize the group. The failure mode is being too trusting or too generous. Social people sometimes can't make the shift from neighbor who borrows sugar to potential threat who knows I have resources. They let the wrong people into their circle. They give away too much too fast. They get taken advantage of by sociopaths who exploit social norms for predatory gain. Outcome: 10% of the population. Survival rate around 70% because they're buffered by community, but vulnerable to betrayal, groupthink, and the tragedy of the commons where shared resources get depleted by people who take more than they contribute. They survive the early chaos reliably, but face political challenges as groups splinter over resource allocation. Group 5. The adaptive pragmatists. These are the people who make it. They're not the strongest, not the richest, not the most prepared. What they have is cognitive flexibility and ruthless realism. They assess situations accurately, adapt strategies quickly, and make hard decisions without hesitation. When society collapses, they don't freeze. They inventory resources, identify threats, and move immediately. They're not loyal to locations, possessions, or outdated plans. If the situation changes, they change. If staying is dangerous, they leave. If a group becomes toxic, they find another. If a strategy fails, they pivot. They're psychologically slippery, hard to pin down, hard to predict, hard to exploit. The cognitive advantage is low ego investment. They're not attached to being right, being the hero, or maintaining an identity. They'll take orders if it keeps them alive. They'll lead if leadership is needed. They'll hide if hiding is smart. They don't care about looking tough or maintaining consistency. They care about outcomes. This makes them incredibly dangerous to compete against and incredibly valuable to have on your side. Skill-wise, they're generalists. They know a little about a lot. First aid, basic mechanics, gardening, navigation, improvised weapons, food preservation. They're not experts at anything, but they're competent at enough things to stay useful in multiple contexts. They can join different groups, trade different skills, and fill different roles depending on what's needed. Psychologically, they run on Bayesian updating, constantly revising beliefs based on new information. They don't fall for sunk cost fallacy. They don't double down on failed strategies. They're not ideological. If violence is necessary, they're capable of it. If cooperation is smarter, they cooperate. If running is the best option, they run without shame. They're pragmatic to the point of being alien to people still running on social programming. The danger is becoming too mercenary. Adaptive pragmatists can drift into pure selfishness because they're so good at cost-benefit analysis. They can burn bridges, betray allies, and isolate themselves if they miscalculate the value of long-term relationships versus short-term gains. The smartest ones don't do this. They understand that reputation is a resource and loyalty is a long-term investment. But the temptation is always there. Outcome: 10% of the population. Survival rate around 85% because they're harder to kill than entropy. They avoid unnecessary risks, exploit opportunities ruthlessly, and never let pride or emotion override logic. They're the ones still standing in month 12, while everyone else is dead, absorbed into failed groups, or barely hanging on. The brutal filter: you're one of these 5 groups right now, whether you admit it or not. You're either unprepared and optimistic, hoarding supplies in isolation, skilled but socially vulnerable, well-connected but naive, or adaptive and ruthless. The collapse doesn't care which one you want to be. It only cares which one you actually are when the pressure hits. The math is ugly but simple. 3 out of 5 groups die in the first month. Your odds of survival default to around 40%, unless you're in groups 4 or 5. If you're in groups 1 or 2, you have maybe a week to migrate yourself into a better category. If you're in group 3, you need to find a community before someone decides you're more valuable dead than alive. Psychological honesty is the filter. Can you look at yourself and accurately assess where you fall? Most people can't. They overestimate their preparedness, their skills, their social capital, their ability to adapt. The guy who thinks he's an adaptive pragmatist is usually a panicked hoarder with delusions of competence. The person who thinks they're socially connected has 3 Facebook friends and 0 real allies. So ask yourself, do I have supplies and a plan and people? Do I have skills people need? Do I have relationships built on years of trust? Can I make ruthless decisions without ego? If the answer is no to all 4, you're in group 1 or 2, and you're on a timer. The good news: you can change groups. You can buy supplies, learn skills, build relationships, and practice cognitive flexibility starting right now. The bad news: most people won't. They'll read this, feel uncomfortable, tell themselves it doesn't apply to them, and go back to scrolling. Those people are statistics in waiting. The principle: survival in a collapse isn't about gear or guns or bunkers. It's about psychology, social positioning, and cognitive adaptability. The 5 groups aren't arbitrary. They're emergent patterns repeated across every major societal breakdown in recorded history. From the Bronze Age collapse to the fall of Rome to modern failed states, the same groups appear. The unprepared who die first, the isolated hoarders who die next, the skilled who become valuable but exploited, the socially embedded who cluster and survive through cooperation, and the adaptive who navigate chaos through ruthless pragmatism. You don't get to opt out of being in a group. You're already in one. The collapse is just the test that reveals which one you were in all along. Your job isn't to survive the collapse, it's to become the kind of person who was already in a surviving group before the collapse happened. Stop stockpiling rice you'll never eat. Stop buying gear you don't know how to use. Stop fantasizing about being a lone wolf tactical genius. Start building relationships. Start learning skills. Start practicing cognitive flexibility. Start being honest about your weaknesses. Start now. Because when the collapse comes, you won't have time to reinvent yourself. You'll just be whoever you already are, and the math will sort you accordingly. Know your group. Know your odds. Know your next move. And for the love of evolutionary biology, don't be the optimist who dies in week 1 wondering why being nice wasn't enough. It never was.